Bé, bon dia de nou. Jo tinc l'honor de presentar-vos el Barry Ginley. El Barry és el tècnic assessor del Museu Victoria and Albert de Londres des de l'any 2002. Li hem demanat especialment que si podia acompanyar-nos perquè és una figura en aquest sentit coneguda dins de l'àmbit en el que estem treballant. I bé, ell ho explicarà més bé, simplement perquè ho sapigueu de forma genèrica. El Barry s'encarrega, diguéssim, de tot el que és l'estratègia i la política d'accessibilitat en el museu. Allà, a més, dissenya i ajuda a implementar totes les polítiques d'accessibilitat en les galeries, en les exposicions noves que hi ha. S'encarrega de la formació del personal. Ahir m'explicava, per exemple, que són prop de 800 persones treballant en aquest museu, per tant us podeu imaginar que és un monstre, i només gestionar aquesta part deu ser complicada. No m'estendré massa en el que és el seu currículum, només que sapigueu que el Barry, abans de treballar pel Victoria and Albert Museum, ha estat assessor per diverses empreses, pel govern de Londres, en els Jocs Olímpics i en altres panells importants, a l'Institut de Ceguesa, el Reial Institut de Ceguesa també anglès. I bàsicament l'interessant per nosaltres era un exemple de veure com l'accessibilitat, de fet, des de l'any 2002, quan comença la seva tasca, no ha esdevingut una opció més per les exposicions que es fan, sinó que és de fet un element de l'estratègia del propi museu. De manera que ell i la seva feina en principi sempre estan presents. L'acompanya també la Susan, que és la seva acompanyant i assistent, i alhora treballa amb ell en el mateix museu. Thank you very much, Barry. Welcome to Barcelona, and I hope you enjoy your stage. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody, and I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me and for making both Susanna and I so very welcome. I'm going to try and put 160 years of the Victoria and Albert Museum, or the V&A as I'll call it, history into a short period. But just an outline of what the museum is and what we show. The V&A is the world's leading museum of art, design and performance. We've been open since 1857. We're based in central London, which is our main site. We have over 12 kilometres of gallery space, so quite a large museum. It takes more than one day to visit the museum. We also have the Museum of Childhoods, also based in London. Later this year we're going to be opening up V&A Dundee in Scotland, which is going to be a brand new site. And in 5 years' time we're going to be opening up a new venue in the Olympic Park in London, which will look at digital design. We have over 4 million visitors per year, and in the last financial year, which was April 2017 to March 2018, 8% of our visitors declared a disability. Now, considering our population, there's about 20% of our population have a disability, this can be quite low, but not everybody will recognise themselves of having a disability, and that's fine. But as long as we're designing for everybody, I think that's the most important piece. So I'm going to just go through our processes and systems of what I've put in place in the almost 16 years I've been at the museum. And also just to say, at the moment, we're still not finished. Access is ongoing for everybody. And I'll say it now, if we design for disabled people, we design for everybody. A ramp is useful for people with push chairs, lifts are useful for everybody, touch objects are not just for visually impaired people, children, adults, we all like to be able to touch objects. It makes us sort of feel more interacted. So, yeah. So, how we began this process, and we have to be very strategic. We can't do access work in isolation. It has to fit with the museum's values and its ideas. So we have to consider the legal case, the moral case, and the business case. Legally, in the UK, when I started, we had the Disability Discrimination Act from 1995, and this ensured that museums and also businesses such as museums made reasonable adjustments in our services, our premises, our employment for disabled people. And just also to highlight our staff in the V&A, we have over 800 staff. 11% of our staff have declared a disability. So, it's quite good. When I started in 2002, it was only 2%. So we've done a lot of good work to try and encourage disabled people to work in the museum sector. So, we've got the legislation, there's the moral case, but also there's the business case, and that was highlighted yesterday. But so how did we go about developing our strategy? So I came into post in 2002 at the time of our first Access Inclusion Community Development Strategy, which was written by my line manager. And I said I would like to write an disability action plan for the museum, of which we wrote in 2003. This was basically an audit of everything the museum did, anything from the strategic approach, policy development, practice, through to learning programs, marketing of our events, and communication was highlighted a lot yesterday. Our collections, have any of the artists or the objects we show, do they depict disability? We looked at the building, and so everything was evaluated via an audit. And with my previous work, working with other organisations, I'm a qualified access auditor. So therefore, it meant I could go to different departments, see what we did well and what was lacking, and put them into this action plan. In 2013, I took on the whole equalities agenda for the museum. And so I wrote the 2014-17 strategy on equality, and I've just presented last week our new strategy to our executive board. So, it's a continual process of keeping equality and access as a strategic aim for the museum. But one of the key drivers for the museum was what we call future plan. And if we go to the next slide. And coming up on the screen now is an image of the front entrance of the V&A. And this is literally where we start our access journey. And Future Plan was designed so therefore we redevelop the museum. And I'll talk more in depth about Future Plan later. But it's making the building accessible, but also making the collections accessible. And I'll touch upon that later. But you have to start from somewhere, and redeveloping the front entrance so people can actually come into the museum was our first major step. So how did we begin this whole process? Well, on screen now there's 4 photographs of our British Gallery. This opened in 2001, and it was the first major project for Future Plan. And I'll just talk through the photos for anybody who can't see them. There's a general view, the top left photo is a general look of the gallery, and just to show you, just brief, because we've got about 22 rooms in this one gallery, so that's just one. Our second photo is an interactive within the gallery. The bottom left is an extending light for which a visitor is using to see an object. And then the other photo is of some drawers and a monitor, and it's just another way of showing some of our objects. As you'll see, not all are as accessible as they could be. So for me, I use this as our benchmark, because this was all in place when I came. So I thought, that's my benchmark, we need to improve. But the reason why this project was so significant is for the very first time, the museum used an access consultant at stage 1 of the process. So literally at the concept stage. Instead of stage 4, where we're almost into detailed design and designing access into the project, means that you're too far down the line to make any significant changes. If you're in there at stage 1, we can consider access at the outset. And also, it becomes very cost neutral because you're planning for it. You're not adding it on and saying, I need another £50,000 for all this access work. So, I think that's, if anything, that's the most important thing I can say today. Stage 1, not stage 4 or 5. And as I say, first access consultant, not just looking at the physical builds, but the interpretation of the gallery. Again, that's just as important. We're not just designing for wheelchair users, we're designing for all visitors. And this was the real catalyst for the museum to creating my job. Going through this whole process and then combined with the educational programs, which I'll talk about later, they felt we need our own internal sort of advisor. So I'm always pleased because that's how my role got created. I don't come from a museum background. My background is more sport and leisure. But the interest in the job was that it was so wide-ranging: strategy, learning programs, building design, etc., etc. So that's what's really interested me in the job. So with our strategy and action plan in place and using the British Gallery as our benchmark, I started looking at gallery interpretation. The best way for the museum to actually, get its message about the objects across. And on screen now we have our definition of interpretation. It's a bridge between the museum's objects and expertise and the visitor's curiosity and knowledge. So our expertise is there to hopefully help visitors understand more about the collection itself. We can do this in many ways, and again I shall outline. But because of the issues around the British Gallery, I developed a gallery design guidelines. So therefore, for all of our future plan projects going forwards, we would have some guidance on sort of widths of doorways, lighting, and lighting is a real big issue at the V&A. We would have guidance on labels, guidance on heights of touch objects, and so on. So we try to be, quite specific about sort of how we presented the collection in an accessible way. Go on to the next. So what did we achieve? So I mentioned about future plan. At the moment, we've redeveloped 90% of the V&A site. It's made us 100% wheelchair accessible. And with the gallery guidelines, we now have large print books in every gallery. So therefore, people who struggle to see some of our labels, because again, some of our older galleries, the labels may be handwritten and in very small text, so we have large print books available. We've developed a whole range of interactives, and some that you saw earlier with the British Gallery. But what we also created was some tactile images, and I'm just about to hold up a tactile image of Pope Leo X, and this is available in the book in the Medieval Renaissance Gallery. Now, with this picture, he's not the most handsome of guys, with the big black nose he's got in the middle. But the reason why we designed it like this is because, so I'm told, Pope Leo X had a very large nose. So in a tactile form, we wanted to show that. Visually, it doesn't look good, but hopefully it works. There's a table outside with this image on, and another interactive that we've brought along, which we've developed for many of our galleries. We have backpacks which families can use, and also disabled people. And the backpack we brought is called Curious Ceramics. It was designed with Sense. They're a charity in the UK who work with deaf-blind people. So the aim of the backpack is not just to show interpretation and a new way of interpreting the collection for families, but it's for families that may have a disabled parent or a disabled child or both, to be able to go around and interact with the collection. In the ceramics gallery anyway, we've got about 15 objects that can be touched. So, we are sort of, quite, especially for blind and partially sighted people, we're very well equipped in the ceramics gallery. We've developed a lot of audio descriptions in the past, and shortly I will play one for you. But we link them to some of our original objects as a trail. On screen we have two photos. The left-hand photo is a Ming vase, and the right-hand photo is a marble owl. Both original V&A objects. The Ming vase was made in 1550, and it's been on open display in our TT Choi gallery for the past 15 to 20 years. It's original, anybody can touch it, you don't have to wear gloves, and it's one of our most popular items. And with that object, we do have Braille, and some of our older objects, we do have Braille information. Now we're having audios. So we won't provide Braille in the gallery for any new developments. On the right-hand side is the marble owl. And I must say, this is my favourite object because it is so detailed. And I'm now going to ask you if you could actually all close your eyes, because I'm going to play you an audio shortly of an object, and then once the audio is finished, if you open your eyes and then see if the audio is how it was described to you. And if we can play the audio, please.
Okay, good afternoon. It is just afternoon, and welcome to the Victoria and Albert Museum.
That's the wrong film.
This is going to be an introduction.
The Bayes Gallery, room number 111. A marble owl. For some visitors, this is literally a pet favourite. This life-size marble carving of a little owl, measuring 23 centimetres. The figure is carved out of one piece of white marble. Starting from the bird's head, you will immediately notice the deep, penetrating round eyes and sharp downward curve of the upper beak. The owl's mouth is slightly open, above a ruff of feathers resembling a beard. From the rough and individualized feathers around the face, the smooth markings of the body make a striking contrast. Notice how sharply undercut the wings are, and they are not symmetrical. The wing, on the left, is positioned lower and stands out slightly, whilst that on the right is held close up, close into the owl's body and head. Follow the wings round to the back and you find the feathers meet at a sharp point, folded over the short tail, confirming the compact nature of this owl at rest. The feet are magnificent, feathered like fine hair, and within each of the 3 toes on each foot, the sharp claw stands out in clear relief. The rear 4th claw of the bird is not depicted. Tame in carved marble, this owl may appear, but its nature as bird of prey is well demonstrated in the sharp bill and the claws. The choice of a fine-grained white marble allows for delicate detail. It was initially roughed out with a claw chisel, which you can detect especially on the base, while a drill was employed to create the deep undercutting of the wings and under the body between the feet. Finally, different sizes of flat chisels on their edge were used to cut in the finer detail. The owl is standing on a roughly hewn, round, cushion-like stone base. This was the work of George Gammon Adams, a British sculptor, and dates around 1850. From earliest times, the owl has been considered a bird of ill omen and death. It is also associated with the goddess Athene in ancient Greece, and from this it became a symbol of wisdom. The owl is a common attribute of the goddess, and as a nocturnal bird, it also often represents night personified. At the other end of this display cabinet are examples of more materials, which are used by craftsmen of small sculpture. They include polished and unpolished agate, a helmet shell, and a thick slice of mother-of-pearl shell. The Gilbert Bays Gallery showcases small decorative sculptures which make use of these and other natural materials. Braille labels accompany these exhibits.
Okay, and if you haven't opened your eyes, you can do so now. So, from what has just been described to you, does that relate to the image that's on the screen? Hopefully it does. So, these audio descriptions are available on our website and for people to be able to use independently on their own smartphones, tablets, when they come into the museum. The museum's Wi-Fi is free to use. So we don't provide devices at the museum ourselves for people to take around because there is a large cost element to it, and also people know how to use their own devices. So it means they don't then have to be taught how to use specific sort of audio guides, etc. So, as I say, for all of our touch objects that we have in the galleries since 2012, we've used audio and not Braille. And also to say that we have about 150 touch objects around the museum in a range of galleries that can be touched at any time. When I get requests from people to say, I'm coming to the museum, is there something we can touch? Or I have I have a real interest in Rodin, then we will ask the curators for permission to touch the Rodin sculptures. And that's been the real interesting journey. When I first started at the museum in 2002, and we asked the curator, can we touch one of your sculptures? And they said, no, you can't. I said, with gloves? No. And, it was a real challenge to get some of the permanent collection used. Now the curators say to me, just let us know when you're going to touch the objects, and then that's fine. Just let us know. If there's any objects you feel that might be delicate, please do let us know. We can then advise you whether it can be used. So they've changed, they've adapted. So where it used to be a real challenge, life has become a little bit more easier now. And that's why I like to sort of really promote those curators that actually understand that we're opening the museum for visitors, not just for their academic friends to come and have a look at the objects. Go on to next. So we've just now looked at some of the interactives. The best way to provide access to our collections is through our learning programs. Again, yesterday we've heard a lot about different learning programs. The two programs that I manage is the British Sign Language talks and the touch tools for visually impaired people, and also our new subtitle talks, which I'll explain shortly. The V&A has, had a good history of providing these talks. So, for example, our touch tools we've been running since 1985, and they started from requests from societies for the blind in London saying, "Is there anything we can touch?" So one of our educators developed a handling collection. Our British Sign Language interpreted talks started in 1995, and our subtitle talks, which I'll explain more shortly, they started in 2015. But for our British Sign Language, and I'll refer to it as BSL, and our touch tools, we have one talk for each program per month. But then, as I mentioned earlier, if anybody comes in or contacts us before and says, "I want to come and visit at a different time to what your tours are programmed," we will facilitate that. We will provide a guide or an interpreter to assist. So we have the British Sign Language talks. When we will use some deaf people to give the talks, as well as our own curators. So we have a mix, because I want to promote sort of disabled people working in the arts. So having sort of deaf speakers present is one way of doing this. We give guidance to our speakers on how to present, because I can't just sort of ask somebody to sort of talk as I am now, because the interpreter has to keep up, and hopefully our translators are able to keep up with me today. But we have to shorten the content because of the interpretation. And I'm going to show you a short film now of one of our guides giving a talk with a British Sign Language interpreter. So if we can play the film, please.
Okay, good afternoon. It is just afternoon, and welcome to the Victoria and Albert Museum. This is going to be an introductory tour to the museum, a taster for this huge collection, which is very varied. We have furniture, silver, ceramics, glass. It was made, joined together. Here, the strong part. This is the weak link. It would break easily. So strong part joined, and then it's let to dry and painted with cobalt oxide, which paints black, and then it's glazed. And it's fired at 1350 degrees centigrade, very high firing, 1350. And it literally vitrifies like glass. So if it's good, fine porcelain, if you ping it with your finger, it rings like a bell. And you can see through it at light. Decoration in China is very important, and there's a lot of symbolism around it. So you can see here we have this Chinese character. It means the long life or immortality.
Is it this? Which one is this?
This one here, the little one. And in the roundels here, you have the peach tree. And the trunk of the peach tree is also meaning immortality. It's a decorative form of this character. The peach is also symbolic of long life and immortality. And down here, we have the three friends of winter.
If we can pause the film now.
And
please.
what this collection...
Thank you. So, as you'll have seen in that film, a couple of times the interpreter asks for clarification, such as the firing of the 1350 degrees. And that's one thing that often throws speakers when they're working with a sign language interpreter, is because they lose their train of thought and so on. Also, it's important to be pointing at an object, and then so visitors know which object you're talking about, and so therefore they can understand, because otherwise you could be talking about a whole gallery and not just one specific object. So hopefully that sort of was just a brief highlight of one of our sign language talks. And that's for people that sign language is their first language. For people who lose their hearing later in life, we've started providing subtitle talks in 2015. And with these talks, we use technology, so we always give the speaker a smartphone to be able to speak in. So as they're speaking, they're holding it up in front of them. It's the best way to pick up the sound. And also it means they can keep an eye on whether we've got a signal on the phone. Then that gets transmitted to a speech-to-text reporter, who then types it, and then within 3 seconds of the speaker saying their sentence, it's in front of the visitor on the tablet. So again, it's another way of providing a talk for people and who are deaf but don't use sign language. And I don't have a film of that to show at the moment. We're hopefully producing one shortly. And again, but those talks happen for all of our special exhibitions. As yet, we've not built an audience to have them on a monthly basis. A final education strand is touch tools for visually impaired people. These were mentioned yesterday again, and again, if we could show my next film, please, this will highlight one of our touch tools, but using a building as opposed to the gallery, an object. So if we could play the next film, please.
Ceramic staircase. A group of blind and partially sighted visitors are led by Elizabeth Hamilton. Elizabeth describes a ceramic staircase and helps the participants to understand and experience the design through touch.
We are standing at the base of the ceramic staircase that, as I mentioned in the British galleries, was commissioned from Minton, of course a major supplier of ceramic ware in this country, in Staffordshire. And he worked in clay that's glazed in tin oxide, which gives a distinctive white colour. This is one effort to emulate porcelain, and also paying tribute to some of the great artists through Europe. We have cartouche with the names of some of our revered artists. So Judy, would you like to come forward here and just find, we've got a splendid gentleman in the middle here.
Oh.
This gentleman, who is nude, the top, crouching down, his legs then, which are sort of bent if you were doing sort of your knee bends.
Are these legs? No.
Yes, well, do they feel like feet?
Yeah, but strange.
Yes,
Like animal feet.
Exactly. So he's half human at the top, so it's a centaur form. So his feet sort of rather like goats'
But his arms seem normal.
and his arms are stretched above his head, and he's supporting this plaque, a panel that then has the name of Rembrandt. And moving down, this is now supported by figures to the left, a gentleman heavily bearded, with wings, and his body doesn't turn into legs of an animal, but in fact his lower part is in a cornucopia, or a horn, which again is decorated with the acanthus leaf. And as I said, if you think of these human forms that we've been feeling on this panel, it's such figures that are supporting the baluster rail as you go up the stair. So walking up the staircase here is quite an entertaining adventure.
So we're a bit short for time, so if I press on. Elizabeth, you've seen in both films now. She's one of our most popular guides, and Elizabeth has helped me train 30 of our guides in how to lead touch tours and how to describe museum objects. So she's very experienced and a great support for us. That's the touch tours, and what we asked our speakers to do with our talks is to ask questions of the visitor. Don't just lecture to them. You know, let's have some interaction, because then the visitor gets out of the talk what they want, and they're not just being lectured to. So that's why Elizabeth was asking questions to Judy, one of the participants. Okay, so my next slide is a display that we've opened at the museum in partnership with a disabled organisation called Accentuate, and they have a history of place projects, and as part of that it's looking at disability in architecture. And we have our display, which is on screen, and I'll talk through the images in a moment. But we're working with Museums Liverpool and museums in Bristol, and we're showing different collections, objects from our own collections. But our collection is covering 800 years of inclusive design. Now, you may think 800 years inclusive design wasn't around, but we're looking at buildings that were designed for disabled people or by disabled people. So the images we have on screen, on the left, top left, is an image with just an overall display, the display and layout. And as you may see on the left-hand side, there's a yellow strip, and that's been designed to help somebody who's partially sighted be able to navigate through the collection. I must say it's not my favourite design element, but some people prefer to be guided that way. Our second image just shows a film with the headphones. Unfortunately, the V&A has a no sounding gallery policy, so we have to use headphones for any of our audios or films. Then our next picture is a tactile image of Normansfield Hospital, which was based in London. And we had some tactile images produced. Again, another thing for learning for the future is that we don't just have a line drawing as it is there. We have a proper model created, because there is the original model in the case across from this image. So personally, I thought the model would be better. And then our final image is a screen with British Sign Language and subtitles, and that's what we're looking to do with the vast majority of our films now. we're now telling for exhibitions and our galleries that all films have to have at least subtitles. So that was our first display, specifically looking at disability and building design. So that's the first for the V&A. If we go on to the next. Our next is our exhibition Frida Kahlo. And it was actually nice to see this morning. It was actually advertised in our hotel. So Frida Kahlo is another way of us really promoting access, because Frida herself was disabled. On the screen, there's two images, one of Frida sitting. She used to do a lot of her own self-portraits and often seated because of her disability. And the next is of her prosthetic leg. And that was one of the legs that Frida had sort of designed herself. Now, what's significant about this is we're not just talking about her art, but we're going to be talking about her disability, her ethnicity, and her fashion, and also her sexuality, her politics. So it's another way of the V&A sort of opening up more of these conversations about diversity and not hiding from them. I spoke at a conference for the Without Walls display a couple of months ago, and somebody asked me, is it risky for the V&A to be talking about disability? And I said, no, it's not risky, it's ambitious. You know, it shouldn't be a risk. You know, disabled people live in society, talk about them. So, but this display and this exhibition, we're actually having the images, her paintings and some of the other information at wheelchair height. Because Frida, if she wanted to look around the exhibition, she would have been in a wheelchair herself. So, you know, that's important that, you know, we at least design it for her, because it's all of her own stuff. Because of time, I'm going to jump straight to my conclusions, because I think that just helps round up my whole presentation. Designing for disabled people needs to be strategic across the board in every aspect of our work. So, you know, having an overall strategy. The design of the building is important. The gallery interpretation is important. Our learning programs, our exhibitions and displays, and our staff training. And I've just noticed I've missed staff training, and it's something I really want to include. So if we can go back to that. Yeah, our staff training, we give disability awareness training to all of our front of house staff, and our security team have disability awareness training, our learning staff, our gallery assistants, and so on. I was once asked, when I gave my first training for the museum, how do you approach a disabled person? And I said, well, you walk up to them and ask them, introduce yourself. Hello, my name's Barry, I'm a member of staff at the V&A. Would you like assistance? And if they say yes, you ask how you can assist. And some people thought this was rocket science, and thought, you can't say that. And one gallery assistant said to me a few months later, Barry, it works. I walked up to a disabled person, I asked if they needed assistance, asked them how to assist, and I was able to help them. And I thought, well, I'm not telling you to do something that, you know, just for the sake of it. It's there. We ask. We don't sort of dictate to somebody that this is what you want because you have a certain disability. So staff training is important. If you can't get past the person on the door, you can have the most accessible building, policies, practices, collections, whatever. But if you can't get past the person on the door, you can't get in to enjoy it. Thank you.
We'll leave for some questions. Okay, yeah, so stand there. Yeah, just put the translator. com sempre anem justos de temps, però en una ocasió així valia la pena deixar uns minuts, si voleu, per fer qüestions, per presentar alguna pregunta, si hi ha preguntes. Allà.
Good morning. My name is Anne-Marie Stott. I lecture on cultural institutions in the University of Toulouse, and I'm in the middle of moving to Barcelona. Thank you for this talk. I've learned a great deal from your presentation. In the arts nowadays, there's so much talk about loss of the senses because of our privileging of sight, because of this ocular centralism that a previous speaker talked about this morning, and to the detriment then of touch, smell, hearing and taste. At the V&A, you're all about art, design and performance. And I wonder, you gave some very good examples of guided talks for the deaf and for the blind, and as did the Quai Branly yesterday, the woman from the Quai Branly, and both of you were talking about, and rightly so, visits, including those with disabilities. But I'm just wondering to what extent we can broaden this issue and bring these points of view, bring these perspectives to the public at large, and see how those with disabilities can become our guides, and how the blind can teach us how to touch, or the deaf teach us how to taste, or the mute teach us about sound, or those in wheelchairs teach us about what dance really means. And the British choreographer Janice Barker, she talks very well about how disabled people have an extraordinary sense of movement, that they have a whole other spectrum. And what would really be exciting, I think, would be to see how we could liberate that whole other spectrum, involving the public at large. And I just wonder how far you've taken that at the V&A. I see you're doing that with the Frida Kahlo exhibition, and I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about where you stand with that.
Okay, we try and if I say initially that our touch tours and our British Sign Language talks, I see them there just as taster sessions to get disabled people first into the museum, because often disabled people come from a very low expectation base for service from any organisation. So if we attract disabled people in first, and then as we do, and we've been doing for a long time, but we do put on other activities, and we have performances, and in the past we've had audio described performances, we've had disabled people performing. So today's talk was just literally that taster, and because this presentation I normally do 2 days when I'm lecturing at the University of Rome, so I've put it into about 40 minutes. So there's a lot that's been missed out, I'm afraid. But we do try and encourage disabled performers and artists to participate in all forms. So, for example, at the end of the month, we have a workshop activity as part of our Friday Late when we're open till 10 p.m. And it's about design, disability and science fiction. Now, as a science fiction fan myself, and having an interest in disability, I think it's going to be a great talk for anybody, and it's just generally for anybody to come in. So it's just another way of being able to sort of link our collections and our sort of aspect of design with disability, but having it open to any visitor that wants to come, not just disabled people.
Thank you, Mr. Ginley. I want to ask you two questions, please. How and with whom are selected the objects to be reproduced or to develop with specific mediation materials? It's one question. And the other is, what is your opinion about the place you put these interpretation stations between or side by side of the object, or in a special place in the exhibition room? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, the first question, I often work with the curators to select some of the objects. There's always a story around how each gallery is going to be designed. And it's important that any of the accessible interpretation we have is part of that story. So we're not just putting an object to be touched in just for the sake of it. It's there because it might be because of the materials or the sort of dynasty, if you like, such as the Ming vase, for example. They're there as a key element to the interpretation and the story. For the second question, we try to design the interactives and touch objects so therefore they're visible for visitors. We try not to build them into corners of rooms, so therefore they're almost sort of tucked away. Because if we're going to all of this effort of designing in objects and interactives, let's show them and let's encourage people to touch. So, and sometimes, it works and they're quite visible. Other times it may look as if they're tucked away. So it's a lot of it's in planning and design, and also where we've been brought in at the stage. This is why, say if we were in at stage one, then, I can influence that design from very early on. But as in some of the earlier projects I worked on, we were brought in later, so the designs were almost sort of signed off by the time I got involved. But it's having them visible because, we want people to use them and to find them easily.
¿Preguntas? Aquí. There's another one question. Yes, muy okay.
Hola. Muy brevemente, siento no poderme comunicar en inglés porque mi inglés todavía no es lo suficientemente bueno, pero sí que quería aprovechar para felicitar a Barry por su trabajo, no solo por su trabajo como profesional en el museo, sino también por su manera de exponer la presentación, que nos ha resultado accesible. Yo soy una persona con discapacidad, estoy intentando trabajar como técnico de accesibilidad, un poco el trabajo que está haciendo él, y creo que en Inglaterra sí que ya es más reconocido. Aquí en España, lo que es el trabajo de las personas con discapacidad como técnicos, todavía es algo un poco por reconocer, ¿no? Pero sobre todo quiero felicitarle también por su manera de exponer la presentación, que nos ha resultado súper accesible también a las personas con discapacidad visual que estamos aquí presentes también en la sala. Muchísimas gracias.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, and don't apologise for speaking in Spanish. I'm a typical Brit. I don't speak any other language apart from English, and some people say I struggle with English. And also thank you for the nice comments. I try to practice what I preach. So I try to preach accessibility and inclusion. And also being blind myself, you know, there's often when I'm at conferences like this and somebody says, on the screen you can see. No, I can't. So that's why I like to try and sort of describe the objects. I only described them briefly earlier, but you know, but this is to say, I try to practice what I preach. So thank you for the nice comments.
Ya está, ¿algo más? I'm going to take advantage of my situation here, so I'm going to ask you something as well.
Okay.
I would like to know in which way these policies you're having on accessibility in the V&A Museum, is it widespread in England? I mean, is this something rare for other museums, or is this something very common to say?
Okay. How to answer this diplomatically?
Briefly, please.
When I first started at the museum, my very first meeting was with access officers from other museums and galleries in London. And there was about 30 of us. Now there's about 5 of us. And I think I'm the only full-time access-related person in the museum in London. However, other museums in the UK do have their access advisors. Whether they're full or part-time, you know, we don't always know, because I was told initially that the average duration of somebody working on access in the museums is 2.5 years. I've been there 16 years. So I'm either doing something right or I'm paying for sins in a previous life. So, which I'm not quite sure. But the will has been there, and it's not just large museums such as the V&A. We've done our bit and still carrying on to do so. But you find some much smaller museums, because they don't have the same hierarchical structure as the V&A, can actually do a lot more. You know, so if you say, ask a curator, have you got an object that can be brought out and touched? It's possibly easier in a smaller museum to do it, especially if you've got somebody who understands the importance of touch and the interaction of collections. So also our legislation is much weaker now. Our Disability Discrimination Act I mentioned earlier, now the Equalities Act, it sort of set targets of making rights of access to buildings, services, etc. And the last provision of that was in 2004. And then most organisations thought, we're not being sued, we're not being taken to court by disabled people. Do we really need an access officer? And so, you know, when people then left their roles, they were never replaced. So it's just, you know, one of these things. Hopefully in years to come, access again will sort of climb up the agenda again. What doesn't help is our current Equalities Act came in 2010, of which the Disability Discrimination Act was consumed into. Other equality agendas have taken precedence over disability because they're easy to do. Disability, you have to make adjustments, you have to have, you know, a bit more of a specialism to introduce interpretation and so on. But that's my personal view, that's not one of the V&As.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Sí, fem la última.
Okay.
Última pregunta. Last one, okay.
Okay.
Hola, buenos días. Muchísimas gracias por su conferencia. Y mi pregunta, como persona también ciega, es, ayer nos hablaba la señora que venía del Museo de París, en que hacían unas reuniones con otros profesionales de otros museos para favorecer la incorporación de la accesibilidad en las visitas a los museos. A mí me gustaría saber si ¿usted tiene conocimiento de que haya en Inglaterra, a partir de esta ley que nos ha hablado, o de antes, o por simple voluntad de los gestores de los museos, algún tipo de reuniones entre profesionales de la museística y del acceso a los museos dirigido a todo tipo de público? Si hay algunas reuniones específicas respecto de la accesibilidad. Gracias.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And you know, that's actually quite an important question. The V&A used to have an access group which had people from the leading disability charities, the Royal National Institute for Blind People, Action on Hearing Loss, MENCAP, which is a charity for people with learning disabilities, SCOPE for people with cerebral palsy, MINDS for people with mental health issues. So we used to have the access group. We used to meet 3 times per year, and each participant got paid. We paid them for their attendance and their advice. Because I'm sure, and when I say this, that other disabled people in the room that have given advice, it's probably been for free. Where we paid because a disabled person's advice is just as important as an architect. Well, actually more so than an architect, to be quite honest. So it's just as important that we pay them for their contribution. So, but unfortunately with the cuts in budget because of the financial crisis some years ago, we've been unable to pay anybody, so we've not had our own access group. However, I chair another museum access group, a much smaller museum called the Horniman Museum in London. And I don't just chair it, I actually learn from that group, because people are talking about the collections in the Horniman Museum, but these ideas can be transferred back to the V&A. Also, if we have individual projects, so for example the image I've shown of Pope Leo, when we were developing those for the Medieval Renaissance Gallery, we brought in a focus group of visually impaired people to help us with that. So we will bring people in as and when, but unfortunately we can't have our own access group all the time because of the financial implications. And that is generally down to myself, not the museum. I don't want to invite people in free of charge and get their advice and then send them away. I think people ought to be paid for their advice, you know, if we're asking for it. So that's down to me, and so whether that's right or wrong, that's for others to decide. But I'd rather sort of you know, pay somebody for their contribution. I'd rather we had a model where disabled people are actually valued for their views, and not the charity sort of model where, you know, we can ask them all we want and get all the information. We won't pay them because, you know, it's a charity model. Again, that's just my personal view, and yeah. But also there are sort of small networks of professionals working in museums on access. And we do meet from time to time. It's not as formal as it used to be. I used to be a trustee of the Museums and Galleries Disability Association, which was an international body, and unfortunately that wound up a few years ago because of people's time commitments. And actually this is an important point because ICOM got mentioned yesterday. 3 years ago I contacted them to set up an access group for museums through ICOM, and unfortunately I'm still waiting to receive a response. So ICOM can be doing a lot more to push this internationally as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry. It was a pleasure listening to you. And right now we have the breakfast. Ara passem a l'esmorzar. Gràcies per l'atenció.